so last time we talked about intermediates, and this time we're really going to look at something about that. And it really is kind of the idea, the impossibility of an intermediate life form. Living organisms are just too complex to be formed gradually by small changes over many generations. You may hear the term irreducible complexity. Now, I don't have it on the board. It's not a term out of our books. But it's this idea that certain structures within living organisms are just too complex that they cannot be reduced to these small changes over long periods of time. And living organisms are just too complex. We could look at a number of different features about living organisms. One of the, quote, simplest is the flagella. It's a whip-like or a tail-like structure that helps cells move around. And I believe it was Michael Behe who used that as an example. It's made up of, I think, 6 parts, if I remember right. And if you take just one of those parts away, the flagella no longer works, and it doesn't provide any kind of natural benefit to the organism. Evolution requires that intermediates be fully functional and capable of survival at every step. They need to be able to live past childhood. For some organisms, that is very, very quick, a matter of hours. For other organisms, especially larger organisms, that is measured in years. Basically, the organism has to be able to survive till it can have offspring. If it can reach that part, it would fit within the evolutionary idea, because it needs to pass on the genes that give it an advantage over other animals. So it has to be fully functional and capable of survival at every step, meaning that its function cannot be impaired, because an impaired function would mean that it would not survive. Now, natural selection. This is something that is often used by evolutionists to put in there for the idea of evolution. And it's the idea that the fittest and strongest are more likely to survive and reproduce. Now, this idea makes sense. I mean, those animals that are better adapted for certain parts of the world are going to survive. If they are not suited for those parts of the world, they do not survive well. Many organisms, my favorite one is the chihuahua. Dropping the chihuahua off in the Antarctic, it probably would not survive, especially the hairless chihuahua. It is definitely more suited for warmer environments, such as the southern United States, Mexico, Central America, the northern parts of South America even. It would probably be much more comfortable in. So yeah, the idea of natural selection is a reasonable idea. The idea that the fittest and strongest are more likely to survive and reproduce. One thing we see in nature, mutations tend to be harmful, not helpful. I have personally never heard of an example of a helpful mutation, at least one that has been documented. All of the mutations I have ever heard of or seen documented are harmful. Now, the best, some of them can be said, they are neutral. They do not provide an advantage. They do not provide a disadvantage. That's the best that can be said for some of them. And while some mutations we think might be cool looking, they tend to be harmful, such as albino animals. I've seen an albino peacock before. It is an absolutely beautiful creature. However, it would not last long in the wild. Why? Because white shows up very well in a jungle, meaning that predators would be able to find him a lot faster than any other animal. Even a brightly colored peacock blends into the jungle better than a white one. Okay, that's a prey animal, something that other animals eat. What about predators, such as an albino python? Well, again, in the jungle, the prey can see the albino python coming. They can get out of the way. They can see it at a much greater distance than they can if it has its natural coloring. So even mutations that we think might be cool looking tend to be harmful, not helpful. The other part about natural selection is that, genetically speaking, it would remove the undesirable mutations. It does not help produce new characteristics. As people have studied genetics and DNA, as people have studied populations under controlled experiments, animal populations, they have realized that natural selection gets rid of genetic information. It does not produce new genetic information. There is genetic information already present within that population. And then as time goes on, as generations continue, certain genetic information is weeded out for one reason or another. Some it might be because of the environment. Others it might just be because certain animals died faster for some reason. Had nothing to do with their environment. This kind of goes into number 4 there. Changes among Darwin's finches, species of finch that Darwin observed on the Galapagos Islands, is the result of inbreeding revealing hidden characteristics. The fact that the genetic information was there, it was just hidden under dominant genes within the population. As new generations came along and young birds were born, those recessive genes, the ones that were hidden, eventually get paired up, and those recessive genes become physically visible, resulting in different beak shapes. Again, the genetic information was already there, and it was just inbreeding among that population brought it out. Number 5, natural selection does not prove evolution. It only reveals characteristics that were already in an organism's genes. So it does not prove evolution, it just reveals information that is already there. Yeah. No, we have that one twice. Number 4, changes among Darwin's finches is the result of inbreeding. 5, we already had that one. Natural selection does not prove evolution. It only reveals characteristics that were already in an organism's genes. This leads to an idea that tries to mask over this problem of intermediates, these intermediate species. And it's punctuated equilibrium. New kinds of organisms are a result of rapid genetic changes that supposedly bring about new organisms in a very short time, within a couple of generations instead of the hundreds or thousands of generations that evolution normally says. And the reason why some scientists started coming up with this idea is simply because they thought about things. If a bat did evolve from a rat, what kind of changes would have needed to take place? And they started exploring it, and they realized that its fingers would need to elongate, become longer, its tail would have to pretty much go away, the head shape would change. And they started imagining what an intermediate would look like. And along with that bat-rat combination, eventually you get to a point where the fingers are too long to grab anything the way a rat does, but they are not long enough to fly. So they don't provide any type of advantage in that aspect. So they started coming up with this idea called punctuated equilibrium. I have also heard it called the hopeful monster theory. And it's because really it flies in the face of traditional evolution in that it says that a lot of evolutionary occurrences happen in a very short amount of time. Basically, all of the changes needed between a bat and a rat occurred within just a couple of generations, even though that there's a lot of differences there. So rapid mutation over a short period of time. Another thing they looked at here were eggs. The different types of eggs that animals lay. There is a difference between reptile eggs and bird eggs, and there are lots of differences there. Those who favor punctuated equilibrium over the older idea of gradual evolution say that the fossil record supports their hypothesis. Because we do not find these intermediate species in the fossil record, punctuated equilibrianists say that the fossil record supports their ideas. Evolution happened so fast that it did not get recorded in the fossil record. So the punctuated equilibrium uses some of the same evidences that creation uses, but comes to a completely different conclusion. Whereas creationists say this is evidence of God and God's creative work, and that God created the animals the way that He wanted them, and they just reproduced after their own kind. Punctuated equilibrium says that evolution happened, but it just happened so quick within a small amount of generations that it did not get recorded in the fossil record. These intermediates were not around long enough to get fossilized. There just weren't enough of them, basically. So, although it still teaches that one kind of organism turns into one over thousands of years by tiny genetic changes, punctuated equilibrium requires these changes take place more rapidly. Sorry, not thousands of years, over a few years. Also, punctuated equilibrium still requires intermediates, even though it is acknowledged that they do not appear in the fossil record. So they're basically saying that because we don't find this proves our idea. Well, yes and no, because there are a couple of interpretations for not finding intermediate fossils. So once again, you need to answer the science video question, and this time the question is, what theory also has the name of hopeful monster? The answer is, whoa, there we go, punctuated equilibrium. So make sure you get that on that question.